Codemotion.
So this is a talk that I like to call Mobile Meow, bringing video to the mobile world. And so just a little bit about who I am. I'm Schechter. I like to call myself the web warrior. And I used to dress like this every day. I don't anymore, but I still liked using the picture for it. And so I work for Facebook. And so if you want to contact me, here's my email address down there. It's just my last name at fb.com. But before I was at Facebook, I spent 3 years as the tech lead of the HTML5 player at YouTube. So all this is coming from a lot of my work that I did with YouTube in the HTML5 space. So like I said, this is really about, this is an HTML5 talk. For those of you who might not be as familiar with HTML5, well, it's pretty much just like HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and we added a whole bunch of awesomeness to it. And so there are not a lot of new features that came out that have been added to what the browser can do today. And you know, the obvious ones for doing video are the multimedia APIs. But with making a video player, specifically the one at YouTube, we actually use quite a number of these different features that came out. And today I'm going to mostly focus on just these two, multimedia and offline storage, and we'll get there at the end. So let's start diving straight into to multimedia stuff. So just like a little sort of background, a little history about YouTube, about the video space. You know, most of the time when people would think about video, it obviously was on the desktop context. When I think about video, when I think about my work that I did at YouTube, it was usually about making cat videos, because everybody loves a good cat video. And we used to serve these in Flash. It was great. And then this new technology came around, HTML5. And so that's kind of, you know, where this project started is, you know, okay, what's this HTML5 thing? What can we do with it? So we had a couple expectations going into it. What could we get out of using HTML5? And the first thing is it's you know, this open source world, which is great. We got open source browsers, codecs, and even players that we can really hook into and help sort of accelerate the development process there. Also, because we're not having to instantiate this extra plugin, we don't need Flash anymore. We should be able to see better performance. It should be able to be a lot faster, and that's always better for a lot of our applications, making them as fast as possible. And because it's sort of built into the browser, we should get sort of just better fidelity and performance, and we shouldn't see things crash as often. We should have just a smoother experience. And one of my favorite things is accessibility. You get all the wins that you get by building things natively in the browser. All those accessibility tools that we have available are going to work seamlessly. Whereas with Flash, there's a lot of extra work that you have to do. Not everything works as good as it should. And so you sort of get these accessibility wins for free. And then the last thing, and we didn't think about this first, but power consumption is an interesting one. And I'll dive in deeper about that later. So now the question is, you know, who can even use HTML5 technologies today? Because we got a lot of users on a lot of different browsers. And today, like, it of course depends on your users, where they're coming from. But the sites that I've worked with, it's roughly about 80% of our users have a browser that can support the HTML5 video tag. And then on top of that, there's a lot of different features, and the percentage sort of goes down a little bit depending on if you want access to the full screen API, which we'll talk about a little bit more too. But so it's like 80%. So the question sort of that was posed here was, we have this Flash player. It's great. Why are we going to do this other thing that only sort of touches 80% of our users? What's the point? And so the world sort of looked like this. We had this Flash lived in all these different places. We could use a lot of, in pretty much any place that somebody wanted to watch a video. HTML5 had a good sort of chunk of overlap. But then we had this tiny little sliver where it was HTML5 only. And that was mostly sort of your iPhone, your iPod, your iPad sort of thing at the time. And like, why are we going to put all this like development effort into that? Well, when we actually looked at how people wanted to use video, people who wanted to build applications and where they were going to make these new ways to have a video experience, the graph kind of shifted, and most people were trying to build things, trying to make things off of our APIs in sort of the phone space and the tablet space. And so this made it sort of obvious, okay, we need to have an HTML5 player in order to support these people who are developing stuff. Let's talk about mobile a little bit more here. So why is it important? Now, I said that people were sort of developing on these mobile spaces, but when we look at sort of, I think this graph sort of does a good job of explaining sort of why it's important. Basically, a couple of years back, we had a little tiny bit of people who were watching mobile videos, and now it's grown to about 25%. And the important thing to see here is that on the desktop, growth has slowed a lot. We're not getting as many, the growth of it isn't increasing as much as in mobile. And in a couple of years, we might start to see mobile be the dominant place where people are watching videos. And so in order for us to stay up with the game and to grow faster, we really need to capitalize on this mobile experience. And like the numbers at Facebook, I don't think they've publicized any, but they're like even more staggering on how people are actually using mobile over desktop. For YouTube, because it's a video and you got to worry about network stuff, I think the growth is a lot slower, but it's definitely moving in that direction. So okay, so let's actually talk about how you're going to do video on mobile. So we kind of had three options. We got Flash, we sort of have native playback, and HTML5 video. So the first one, Flash, it's exactly the same as you'll see on the desktop. You really don't have to make any changes, which is great, except you don't actually have Flash everywhere. On your iOS devices, they're not running Flash on newer versions of Android, so you can kind of throw that one out. Sure, it's going to work on early versions of Android. It's not going to work very well, but so you don't really want to spend your time in that space because it won't work everywhere. Native is cool. Especially it's really important when you're working on like a feature phone, when that's really your only option. And so what we can do there is we can just sort of stream a video right to the device with the RTSP, and we won't have any ability to really add any features or functionality to it, but we can still sort of have a video being shown. Also, if we want to sort of go and run an app when somebody hits like a YouTube embed, then there's custom protocols on Android and for iOS where we can open up our app. I don't believe that Windows phones have this yet, but it's something that might come in the future. And for YouTube, a lot of times they kind of special case it, which obviously if you're building your own application, you won't necessarily get. But this also causes a lot of problems if they special case it and then you can't go to the app that you actually want to. But the important one is talking about HTML5 video. This is where the excitement is. And so most people, when they think about the browsers in the mobile space, they're like, all right, well, I got Safari on iOS, and I've got this Android browser or Chrome on my Android, and that's not quite what it looks like. There's really a lot of different options. People use a lot of different browsers on all their different devices. I personally, I'm a big Opera fan. I run Opera as my default browser on my Android, and then we have even like new devices that have like weird builds of WebKit, and there's feature phones. So even this is really just a sample, and so there's a lot of different use cases that you have to worry about because there's a lot of different phones that are coming from all over the world. So let's actually start to look at some code. What does actual video tag stuff look like? So the first place to start, simple video tag. Excellent. So what would we need to do? Well, we add a source to it. This seems simple enough, but what's the format? Well, we actually have a couple different things to choose from. And on the desktop space, I'm a big fan of WebM. Google's been promoting that a lot, and it's great. But in mobile, I don't know if it actually makes as much sense. So if we look at sort of the distribution on what is supported in our mobile space, we can see that for the most part, H.264 is supported everywhere. Earlier versions of Android don't have it for Firefox, but everyone else supports H.264 pretty well. And in WebM, it's a little bit sparser. And you might be thinking to yourself that like, oh, okay, maybe I can just do H.264. Everybody's on a newer version of Android. Well, you won't be that lucky, because if I scroll down here, we can see that the distribution for Android uses is there's a wide distribution. And Ice Cream Sandwich is Android 4, and Jelly Bean is 4.1. And so this is actually which ones Firefox supports H.264 just in this tiny slice. So you really need to have both H.264 and WebM or OGG so that whatever browser your users are using, they'll be able to serve video. So that's very simple to do. You can just have the two different formats, have them side by side. But the question then becomes, which one should you have first? Which one do you want to prefer for your users? Because the browser is just going to take the first one that it knows how to interpret. And for that, I'd like to talk about power. So this video is a video that is taken from one of our cat-powered data centers. Let's see if the internet's working well enough to watch this video. They got me on the same Wi-Fi as everyone else, so it's a little spotty. Go. Well, I'll give it just a couple more seconds to see if it goes. It's not really that important because it is just a joke, but oh well. I see it's loaded that there are annotations, but okay. Well, I'll skip over it. It's just a little cat in a wheel, and it's kind of funny, but our data center, I've never been in a data center that's actually cat-powered. Oh, there we go. Oh, and it's buffering again. Oh, okay. Pause it for a second.
I'm going to take my modem, Wi-Fi modem, so you can.
Okay. Oh, and I even thought it was buffering. Anyway. Little cat, he's cute, he's powering the, he gets a treat at the end, it's kind of neat. It's not important though, we'll move on. So this guy that I know out of Tel Aviv, Yossi Oren, he did some power consumption studies. And he took some tablets and some Chromebooks and stuff, and he looked to see which, when playing video in these different formats, which one consumed the most amount of power. And so the couple things I want to point out here is one, Flash sucks. So, whenever I'm working with the Flash engineers at YouTube, I always point this out to them. I'm like, you see that? Flash sucks. But the other interesting thing is to notice is that when we have things that are hardware accelerated, so when there's like a physical chip that can do the decoding of our video, it's going to be a lot lower than if it's being done in the software. And H.264 in this case is lower than WebM in both places. But I think this is kind of neat because the WebM chips are brand new. H.264 has had plenty of years to go over iterations and make it better. And I hope that WebM will, once we actually do start seeing it in phones, because it's really difficult to find a phone that can do hardware decoding of WebM. But once we start seeing that, and we've had a couple more iterations of it, I do hope that this line will be lower than that one. So anyway, I definitely recommend that you do put H.264 as the primary format and then fall back to WebM in cases where the user can't view an H.264 video. So we've stuck this in the page, and what does it do? Well, in this case, it actually does kind of nothing, which sucks. And here's like it shows us a video, but that really isn't the mobile experience. So I took some snapshots down at the bottom, and this is kind of what it looks like when you just throw a video tag with a source in. And I don't know about you, but I can't tell that these are going to be video playback, other than this one. I see a big, nice play button, and I'm like, oh, I can click that, I can play it. So that kind of sucks. And if you click it, it actually won't actually play the video. So now what I can do is I can put in some more stuff and use the poster attribute to add an image. But even then, like, I can actually click on some of those things, they'll play the video, but still, it doesn't look like a video. It doesn't look like something I can interact with. So if you're starting out making a video player, and you have like your own brand, we actually recommend that you have your own queued state. So the video poster, like as great as it is, it kind of it can be stretched sometimes. The different browsers, sometimes they'll have a pause frame when you pause the video, or sometimes they'll go back to the poster. It's kind of wonky. And so the pro tips: create your own queued state, and use just an image for whatever poster you want, and then you can replace it with the video tag when you actually go to play. And this way you can actually have like an experience that people can recognize, like, oh, this is a video, and you can be like, oh, this is whatever your company name is. This is, for us, it was like, this is a YouTube video. It was very easy. People recognize their play button, recognize their brand. We also recommend that you set the background color so that you have this continuity across the different platforms. Some of them will set background color, some of them won't. So then once you actually clicked it, how do they play? Well, it's kind of different again. So some of them will play inline, and you'll see this on like your tablets, like your iPad, and on the newer versions of Android, they'll also play inline in the page. But a lot of them will actually sort of go into this full screen experience. And there's no way around it. You're just going to have a full screen video. And so this is on your iPhone, your iPod, early versions of Android, and Windows Phone does this as well. So for this sort of video playback, it's kind of interesting. You can, the video tag doesn't actually need to be what gets clicked on. You can just call play for it to go full screen, and you can have this little 1 pixel by 1 pixel thing that can be off screen. And as long as it doesn't have visibility hidden or display none, you'll be okay. And it'll start playing your video. And the cool thing, another thing to remember is for iPhones, they do this like zoom animation into it. So if you want it to be like a nice smooth zoom from the center, from when you clicked, I would recommend that you take your 1 pixel by 1 pixel video tag, and you put it where the actual image is. So that way, when they click it, it looks like it's zooming from that space. And WebKit's got some great interactions too. Even though you're in this full screen context and you can't see the rest of the page, all these events are still going to fire. You can still update the page in the background, and then you can listen to this begin and exit and end full screen events that your page can still interact with. And one of the disadvantages of when it goes into full screen, you're only going to get the native controls, and so you're not going to be able to overlay custom UI and do extra features. But we'll talk about controls in detail. So the next thing, we have this control attribute. That's great. But again, it's sort of, we have a lot of different ways that the browsers sort of render controls. And so I have like some snapshots again. And you can see like the Firefox one looks much different than Chrome or the Android browser. And then, this is the full screen one for iOS. But the important thing, so like there's differences, but the important thing is they all have a play pause button, and they all have a seek bar. The other ones have other features, but they're not as important, and you can't always get them to work. So why might you want custom controls? Like, can't these controls work fine? And like they might be fine if you want, but if you're building a brand, if you're building your company, you want to be able to preserve that brand for people to recognize it, and have this unified experience across all of your different devices and where people are viewing it. If it's on the desktop, it's on the mobile. And so here's just a little sample that I had. These controls are really small, so let me make them a little bit bigger. Now I can actually like touch them with my finger. And so like, I have just very simple controls here. I can start playing my video, and I can do my seeking. And the thing that I love about this little example is I always wanted to add an extra feature to YouTube, and they never let me do this. And so now I'm trying to convince people at Facebook that we need to add a similar thing. But it's this button here, and I call it the kitty time button. And so if you get tired, you just hit the button, and you get a nice little kitty in a box or whatever. So that's my kitty time feature. And I know it seems like a joke, but I'm actually using it to make a point. Is sometimes you want to add additional features that aren't natively there. And so, for YouTube, for example, we have annotations and playlists and captions, and there's a lot of richness that you'll want to add to your video experience that you'll need custom controls for. So pro tips when doing custom controls. Remember that the seek bar, users are going to want to click and drag that. For some reason, not all of the browser implementations allow you to do that. So remember, you got to prevent the scroll on touch start, so that way when they're clicking and dragging, they're not also scrolling. And volume is an interesting one. So some of these, most places don't actually allow you to set the volume. So don't waste your time. You don't need to build controls for it. Users are used to using the actual physical hardware buttons for it. So don't worry about that. And remember, people's fingers are fat. So we recommend something like about 40 pixels for the size of a button with 10 pixels of padding. And another cool thing is you can use SVGs, which have really good browser support on the mobile space and on the desktop. So that way you can scale these buttons back and forth depending on the size of the screen and stuff, rather than creating new images for your desktop and images for mobile. Don't trigger content with hover. That doesn't make any, I can certainly hover over my phone, but my phone doesn't know that. So that's not gonna help you out. And full screen's an interesting one. You can kind of fake it. You don't always have the ability to go full screen. So we'll talk about, so let me sort of dive in and talk a little bit more about that. So we do have this API called request full screen. This works on the desktop. There's not complete browser support for it yet. Half of the places have a vendor prefix in them, half of them don't. But so what about the mobile space? Well, some of those APIs have trickled down to the mobile browsers, but it's kind of already full screen. I mean, there's a little bit of browser Chrome, but can't that experience be good? And yeah, that's okay. That's an okay compromise if you only see that Chrome. And so what you can do to sort of fake it in places that you don't have the request full screen API is the easiest thing to do is just open up a new tab. Then you have the entire page to work with, and it's a similar sort of full screen experience. But remember, sometimes in this mobile space, they'll scale your web page. They'll zoom out or zoom in, and so you can use the viewport in your CSS to make sure that it doesn't do that. So that, one case where this happens often is with the new Windows 8 tablets. People can pin things to the side. So if you have something that's supposed to be rectangular, and they'll stretch it out like this, they'll often zoom it out, and you'll have really tiny buttons. So make sure that you set something like the width equal to device width so that it doesn't shrink your buttons that people are trying to click on. And also for WebKit, before they have request full screen, you could use WebKit enter full screen on the video tag element only, and that's going to give you just native controls. You won't have any of your fancy kitty time buttons, but that might just be okay for your use case. And it's important to realize that you have to wait until the metadata is loaded to call that anyway. So now let's talk about autoplay. Autoplay is an interesting one that actually causes a lot of issues. So what happens when you add autoplay to a video element on mobile? A lot of times it looks like this. It won't play. It's just going to give you your play button still. So what happens is the browser's vendors have said you need a user interaction. You can't just have autoplay. We're just going to ignore it. And so the reason for this is mostly that users are going to be charged for data, and they don't want to eat up their battery resources at the same time. They only want to let the users decide, and it's a little surprising because even when you're on Wi-Fi and you're not paying for that data, they're still gonna disable autoplay. So where do you actually see this feature? Or I guess it's a feature. Where do you see this sort of this ability to not play your videos? Well, it's mostly the places that are running the phones. So Google and Apple and IE. Everybody else is sort of okay with it because they just don't care as much. But you're going to have to work around it. Anyway, so basically what you need to do, somebody has to touch the screen in order for you to play your video. So you could do something simple like this. You could do just like on-click, desktop play, which works simple, but if you have a complex application like YouTube, where there's this whole sort of chain of different things that might happen, you won't necessarily have all the data that you need when the user clicks play. So for YouTube embed, the important part here is this little bubble here. We wait for the user to click before we fetch this data. There's a lot of different people watching YouTube videos. Most of our embeds actually don't get clicked onto play, so we don't load all the data so that there's less load on our servers. And so to do this, you set up a little thing, you wait for some click event, and then once the data is returned, then you can set the source, call load, and play it. And the important thing here to look at is this line right there. You have to call load on the video element when that click event happens. That's sort of telling the browser, like, I wanted to play this video, and it sort of unlocks it so you can then call play on it later. And some weird little bug that Android has, you should wrap your call to play within a timeout. 0-second timeout is fine, but this is just sort of a tricky bug that they didn't work out very well. So what about embeds? Embeds are always an interesting thing. So you're creating new content, and you're thinking about, how do I get this out to other people to use, to interact with, and so most people, the first thing they think about is a script tag. Script tags are great. You can put content on and interact with it pretty well. But the YouTube video player is more than just a video tag. Like I was saying, we have all these custom controls and stuff, and we don't want the user's CSS and their JavaScript sort of interacting it, possibly screwing up what it looks like, how it works. So we needed our stuff to be sandboxed. So the script tag was not an option. The next thing we thought about was like, oh, we can use an object tag. And this is great for the Flash player. But the problem with objects is we can still load that HTML page, and the user can interact with it, but there's no way to interact with it through JavaScript. And so for people using our APIs to build interesting projects and stuff, they wouldn't be able to use these new things. So we threw that out. And the last thing we landed on is an iframe. And this would allow our stuff to be sandbox, and we can use JavaScript to communicate through our API with the post message API in the browser. So our embed looks a little bit like that. The one thing I kind of want to call out here is the allow full screen attribute right here. Now, until a couple months ago, that used to do absolutely nothing. And it's kind of silly that we would have it there. But remember I mentioned that request full screen API earlier. Well, if you wanted to call that function from an embed, if it's in an iframe, you actually need this attribute there. But at the time when we did this, the standard was not finalized. And so anywhere that it would work, you'd have to have a vendor prefix on it. It didn't really work at the time. And it wasn't until recently that, that Opera came out with their full screen API and didn't have the vendor prefix. And only 2 or 3 weeks ago was there a check-in in WebKit to remove the WebKit prefix. But the thing that you gotta, so why would we do this? Why wouldn't we just add it once these things were finalized? And it's mostly because our embeds kind of live on forever. We put it out there, they go into all these different places in the world, and we wanted to make sure that when this API got finished, when it got standardized, we could add the full screen features to it. So remember to plan for the future if you're going to be putting something out for other people to use. And that's a really tough one to think about because you certainly don't want to add bloat. And we took a little bit of risk hoping that this was the attribute that they would settle on, and we got lucky. So definitely, think about those things and the trade-offs when you're releasing content to everyone. So pro tips, if you are using an iframe, one thing to do right at the first line of CSS, just put overflow hidden on your HTML element. And this is going to save you some weird iPhone resizing bugs. The next thing is on your body. You want to make sure that you stretch it to the full width and height. Again, if people are resizing things, sometimes there's some redraws that are kind of weird. And so we'd like to set our background color. In our case, it was black. That made sense for our application. For you, it might be a different color. And also, remember to remove this tap highlighting. And so for video playback, when you click the button, something happens. You know that you've interacted with it. You don't need it to be highlighted like you might have for an anchor. And so now I'm going to dive into some of the offline and storage things. Let's see. Okay. I'll speed through this because I think we're running short on time. So the first thing people think about with the app cache is sort of offline access. And for a video streaming service, that's kind of weird. We can't let you download the video, so should we really be using it? And the thing is, we can actually do a lot more with it. We can download our JavaScript and sort of save on latency, so you don't have to keep checking to get the new JavaScript. And so app cache works like this. It's pretty simple. You have this this manifest equals some URL here, and then you can have some scripts and style sheets that you might want to be included there. And then your manifest URL looks like this. You list the things that you want to get cached, and you list the things that need to be pulled from the network. So for this example, just some random image. So now if you wanted to force an update, because if that's just like that, it's never going to know to fetch new things. All you got to do is change the manifest. Any character will do. One thing that's pretty easy that we recommend is just throwing in something like a build date there, something that's automated, just a counter that'll increase. And then when you have AJAX responses, you can also return your build date in there, and then in your JavaScript you can sort of check to see oh, okay, my script build date is this, and now I did this AJAX request, got a new build date. Okay, let me go and update my JavaScript files. And of course, there's a lot of extra work that you have to do there. This is simplified, but that's sort of the basics, the premise. So some gotchas to think about when you're doing this. If you have any get params, those are going to be considered different URLs, and so it's not going to cache them the same. If you do not include, for iOS, you basically have to list all the different URLs that you're gonna have access to. So for YouTube, all of our streaming servers are coming from different places, so we have to throw in a star there so that it knows to request from anywhere. And sometimes things can get a little scary if you are changing things with the history API, doing replace state, or having redirects, where some things get cached, things work a little buggy. So just don't sort of take it for granted when you're using it. Don't assume it's going to work. Remember to test these things to make sure that you can that the app cache works as you expect. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and I'll take questions. Thanks. Oh, and by the way, I've got some swag. You guys can just come up and grab it afterwards. So, who's got questions? Nobody has questions. Yeah.
I got a question about the protocols for streaming, video streaming. There is any open source around for making video streaming on the web?
So actually, making those H.264 streams and the WebM stuff. So there is. Unfortunately, it's not my area of expertise, so I don't actually know the best ones to use. But I will look into it, so the next time I get that question, I'll know how to answer it.
Codemotion.